Hey everyone, what's up? Mirai here with an early look at some of the things that we're seeing on the 6.1 PTR. Now, a lot of people are covering things like class changes, raid content, pets, item changes, garrisons, blah, 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 blah. I'm here to talk about some new video settings that have recently shown up within the last few patches on the PTR. So if you haven't been keeping up with the PTR patch notes, and by PTR patch notes, I mean MMO Champion, because believe it or not, most of this stuff doesn't actually appear in Blizzard's own patch notes. Yep, but they did just release a tech blog on some of this, so if not, then you probably wouldn't have known that they went ahead and added MSAA back into the game, as well as adding SSAA. You heard me, folks. Multi-sampling is back, and super sampling has just arrived. Now we can finally appreciate the beauty of Draenor the way that it was meant to be, as well as the rest of the world once again, without all of that terrible, terrible aliasing that we've been dealing with for months. Seriously, we've all been slumming it since 6.0 was released. Now, in addition to both MSAA and SSAA, Blizzard also added NVIDIA's HBAO+, which stands for Horizon-Based Ambient Occlusion, and now takes the place of SSAO Ultra. I don't know why they slapped the plus sign on the end of it, so I'm just going to drop it moving forward. But I think the new level of ambient occlusion looks great in-game, and it seems to put no additional load on my hardware when compared to SSAO High. However, I am using NVIDIA hardware. On the PTR forums, other NVIDIA users are reporting the same as me. Little to no load being added when making the move from high to ultra. But AMD users have been reporting that this new level of AO is giving them a performance hit. So who knows if you AMD users will have to deal with that once the patch goes live. It may be inevitable though, and I wouldn't look past the idea that NVIDIA's own HBAO happens to run better on NVIDIA hardware. I'm just pointing that one out. Now, in addition to all of that, in build 19508, Blizzard added both depth effects and lighting quality, as well as adding in a drop-down setting to toggle the outline mode on or off completely. And you may have noticed that we've lost the refraction setting, but really it's just been merged into depth effects, which now controls both refraction and something else called depth-based opacity. Now, I've only found one example in the game that shows any sort of difference between the levels of this setting, and even then it's only being affected by depth-based opacity and not refraction. In this garrison example, you can see that there's an ever so slight difference in the torches along the wall when changing between each level, but I'm not sure that's enough to warrant its own setting. Seriously, I haven't found anything or anywhere else in the game that this setting affects, so it's possible that this feature isn't fully implemented yet, I guess. I mean, refraction was its own setting for months before teaming up with depth-based opacity to make depth effects, and I have no idea what the refraction setting does in World of Warcraft. No idea. On the other hand, lighting quality is looking pretty good. Now here's a shot in the level 3 Alliance garrison just outside of the mine, and I'd like you to focus on the lights here, here, and here, and even the fishing shack all the way in the back is affected as well. Lighting quality is currently set to low, but when I kick it up to high, there's a noticeable change in the lighting, and it's actually creating a nice glow, as well as adding some shadows to the environment around it. It's not incredibly obvious, and you might not notice it if you weren't looking for it, especially since it doesn't affect all of the lights or what you might perceive as a light in the game. Yeah, I'm a little bummed about that, but if you venture somewhere really dark, then you get the full effect of the setting. And in Duskwood, the difference between the two levels is really, really noticeable. Now, not only does it affect the environment, but it also affects players in the vicinity of the lights as well, which is very cool. Unfortunately, these lights don't cast their own shadows for player models, and maybe Blizzard has some plans to make this happen? Maybe? Yeah, maybe. That would be cool. But it could also be true that having to calculate such shadows on the fly would be a little too intensive overall. So who knows what we'll see in the future. Now we're not done just yet, and as of PTR build 19533, Blizzard implemented possibly one of the coolest things they could have ever implemented in the realm of video settings, and that's the ability to fine-tune the level of anti-aliasing in order to meet your specific needs. Over on the Advanced tab, we can now individually tweak the levels of multi-sampling, the levels of post-process AA, as well as this super sampling settings, and we can mix and match any of these that we want in order to find a level of AA that looks great in-game and caters to the performance of each of our systems. To that, I say, bold move, Blizzard. Let's see if it pays off. So you can still select any of the standard AA options from the main graphics tab, and when you choose something and hit apply, the settings on the advanced tab will reflect that change. But this is where you can get creative. If you want to add CMAA and MSAA together, you can do that. If you want to add SSAA and MSAA together, you can do that too. And if you have a low-end system which may have a difficult time consistently keeping a playable frame rate, you can actually drop the render scale below 100% in order to boost performance. Hell, you can even drop it lower than 50% using the console variable if you want to kick up the game's difficulty a few notches, or just maybe want to mess with your friends. I'll also add that the render scale only affects the in-game world and does not affect the user interface, which is unfortunate if you did want to mess with your friends. But you can see that the values below 50% are pretty rough around the edges, and that's probably why Blizzard set that to be the minimum percentage in the UI. Now, you may have noticed that we do have access to additional levels of multi-sampling in the advanced tab beyond the standard 2x, 4x, and 8x that you're used to seeing. And if you've ever used a program like NVIDIA Inspector, then you may have seen something like this before. Such a level of customization may be a bit of overkill, and I'm not entirely sure what benefit the added depth levels give World of Warcraft in terms of quality, because having played around with this setting for some time in several areas of Draenor, I've yet to see a difference, but it does increase the load being put on your GPU. Now below that, there's the multi-sample alpha test setting, which does nothing on its own and works in tandem with the setting above it. And I never, ever expected Blizzard to implement anything like this into the game. It's difficult to put this into layman's terms what this does, but it applies anti-aliasing to transparency, or alpha. I don't want to get too far off track, but multi-sampling by itself doesn't actually affect the entire scene, and it generally leaves a lot to be desired in terms of anti-aliasing. But with this added alpha test setting, it pretty much fixes that problem. It's a very cool setting to have access to if you're looking for the best quality image that you can get. Now below this are the PPAA options. This stands for post-process anti-aliasing, and it's the standard FXAA and CMAA options that we've had since 6.0 launched. Nothing special to see here. And then to the right, there's the render scale slider, which takes you from 50% all the way up to 200%, 200% being 2x super sampling. And I feel the need to stress that 200% on the render scale does not mean 200% of your X and Y axes of your resolution. It means 200% of the pixel count of your current resolution. Those two things are not the same, and to fully double your X and Y axes, you would need a 400% increase in pixels, which would be 4x SSAA. I've thrown up some math on the screen to help show how this works. And in addition to the slider, Blizzard has also added a resample quality setting here that you can play with to see which filter you like better when using a render scale other than 100%. I believe there are more than just bilinear and bicubic filters out there in other games or programs, so we'll have to see if Blizzard thinks it's worth their time to add those as well in a future update. Now, if you're not familiar with all of this stuff, or you don't feel comfortable adjusting these settings, then you can always just stick to one of the several predefined options that will be available to use on the main graphics tab. But I will point out that when you begin customizing your AA settings on the advanced tab, the main tab will show anti-aliasing as custom. So don't freak out if you see that. So in closing, and in my opinion, these are some of the most exciting changes to happen in 6.1, and I've been on the PTR playing with this for a while now. I understand that there probably aren't a lot of people who care about this stuff, but if you've seen my other anti-aliasing videos on my channel, you know that this is like Christmas to me, or whatever other gift-giving holiday that you recognize. I'd also like to point out that Blizzard describes some of these new levels of AA as performance crushing in their latest blog, and they repeatedly link to the recommended settings to remind people what level of hardware they should be running in order to take advantage of some of these things. But even on current generation hardware, it's still difficult to turn up every single setting to its max and then add multi or super sampling on top of that, especially at resolutions above 1920 by 1080. Unfortunately, I would have liked to have seen a bit more information in the tech blog about the advanced tab, as well as depth-based effects, since its actual use has seemed to evade me up to this point. But even with the tech blog, I think there are still plenty of people who are going to be caught off guard with all of these new settings and initially confused as to what they do, because the tooltips of these new settings are either bland and undescriptive or are fairly technical, both of which aren't exactly Blizzard's fault, but also these settings might not seem to do anything when initially changed. You know, when you change view distance or shadows from high to low, the difference is immediately apparent. But if you do that with lighting quality or depth effects, and you're standing in the wrong spot, you notice nothing. Well, that's all I've got. Hopefully you're as excited as I am about these new video settings, and maybe I can get some further information out there about all of this before 6.1 goes live. Thanks for watching, guys. Mirai out.